Welcome to the Archive, travelers, a place where we journey through the vast realms of storytelling, exploring tales both familiar and new. Today, we're reading The Unseen Hunt, Chapter 2. Kick back, relax, and settle in. Look, I'm not imagining it, I swear. I know what I saw. Look, son, it was late, dark, and you've been through a harrowing situation, the kindly officer said. He didn't let Jean's tone affect him, likely used to as bad, if not worse, language. You're shaken, and that's understandable. It's real easy to make mistakes in a situation like that. I... I... The thing, the monster, for what else could it be called, had been as real as the man sat opposite him, and the cooling styrofoam cup of hot chocolate in his hands. But then, that was what hallucinations did to you, wasn't it? You saw things that weren't there. Could it have been? He wanted to say no, but the truth was so much harder to accept. Vanishing girls, flower petals, monsters. Now, I'm not saying you're going loopy or that you need help. Dangerous situations like that, it makes sense your mind plays tricks on you. Fear does that to even the bravest of men. If it were a dog, I don't know, might have reared up, but at this point, with the damage done to the victim, we're thinking it might have been a bear. Jean wanted to laugh. How the hell would a bear have found its way into Vale, right into the park in the center of all the urbanization? It was ridiculous. But not quite as ridiculous as the idea of it being a monster. You're right. I must have messed up. Sorry. Like I said, it's all right, son. We found the body of the victim, though not the animal nor the girl you said got in the way. If he thought Jean had dreamt that up as well, he refrained from saying so. I can't tell you much about an ongoing case, but our initial thoughts are that she managed to get away. At least we hope she did. No news is good news. At least she drew it off you while she was at it. What about the body? You leave that to us. It's not something a young man like you should have to think about, let alone deal with. The officer sighed, and it looked for a moment like he didn't want to deal with it either. Who would? For the record, we have your name and address. If we need you, do you mind answering any more questions further down the line? Oh, yeah, of course. You can call me or send someone around. After school hours, that is. If you need me during, you can come to the school. Eastfield High, right? Yeah, that's the one. Thanks, son. We appreciate this. The man patted Jean's shoulder, as had every officer to see him. They all seemed to think he was one fright short of a breakdown, which was probably about right. The shakes had gone away, but his fingers still twitched every now and then. In the crime dramas, the one on the scene was always treated as the first suspect, and he wondered why they were being so nice here. Maybe it was a good cop, bad cop, without the bad, or maybe they knew from even a cursory look at the body that no 17-year-old could do that. The poor guy had to be covered in claw and teeth marks, none of them human. The officer helped him up, replacing his cold chocolate with a new one, fresh from a nearby coffee shop, and led him to the front entrance, hand around his shoulder the entire time. Jean felt weak at first, but after a few seconds to stretch his legs, he felt a little of his normal strength return. You're gonna be shaken for a bit after that. Try to get some food and do your best to keep it down. If you feel you need tomorrow off school, take it, but it is best to be around people. A dose of normality will help you recover quicker. Right, got it. If you need any help or you feel worse, get in contact. We've got people who can help with this. I think I'll be okay, but thank you. The officer clearly didn't believe him, but accepted his decision with a nod. A taxi had already been called for him and prepaid, and he climbed into it outside, leaning back as the door shut. They'd offered him a lift home, but the last thing he wanted was Mr. and Mrs. Mars seeing him come back in a squad car and jumping to the wrong conclusion. He didn't want to talk about this tonight. He wanted to forget. Luckily, the cabbie felt the same way, wishing him a good night as he clambered out and driving off. To Jean's relief, Mrs. Mars was absent, back inside where it was warm. Safe. Jean rubbed his hands together and made his way up the stairs to the second-floor landing and the apartments there. He had a feeling this would be the last late-night jog he took for a while. at least until the news told him a killer animal had been caught. He fumbled with his keys in the lock, missing twice due to his nerves and dropping the keys on the third time. With a curse, he stopped to pick them up and stood to find himself face to face with the frowning girl. Blake again. Shit. Sorry, he stammered. Couldn't get it in. He paused, catching the implication. The key, I mean, he cursed again internally, like she'd think he'd meant anything else. Sorry, ignore me. Had a bad night. Her eyes flickered oddly in the moonlight. Were they yellow? And glowing slightly? No, it was his mind playing tricks on him again. She hummed, saying nothing. The key slotted in a second later, and he almost gasped in relief, pushing it with one shoulder, shooting a quick good night to the girl outside. It is a good night, she said, walking away, not to her room, but outside, down the stairs. No, it's not, Jean whispered, closing, locking, and then putting a chair up against the door. It's not at all. He fell on his bed, head in his hands. Fuck! I should have warned her about the bear. He looked up again, prepared to make a dash for the door. She'll be gone by now. Damn it! God, he was a mess. The clock on the desk beeped at around 10:30. He wanted to call his parents, to cry, yell, and just get it all out, but Mon would be asleep, and it was a working day tomorrow. Dad was on base and probably busy. And really, did he want to talk about what he'd seen? He wasn't even sure what it was. That thing, it hadn't been a bear or a wolf. Maybe he'd seen it wrong. He'd been too terrified to stop and measure the damn thing. But the shape of it, the eyes, the proportions, those all felt wrong for any animal he recognized. And the girl, he'd heard her speak, and more than that, he'd gotten away while the animal was distracted. Well, it was killed, he murmured. Wait, but they said they didn't find its body. Had the girl taken it away? Like some kind of trophy? Who the hell was she? And he used a scythe to hunt with anyway. No, he gritted, head between his hands. Stop thinking about it. Forcing himself to lay down, Jean pulled the blankets up to his chin and clenched his eyes shut. His apartment was safe, as was he, and soon the police would sort this out and make the whole city safe. Like the guy said, he'd been through a bad thing. He'd get better. Jean's forehead pressed against the tiles of his shower. One hand turned off the hot spray before it could turn cold, and he stood for a moment, letting the water drip down. His eyes were bloodshot, his face slack. Sleep, it hadn't come easy. Night terrors plagued him, waking him up constantly, and in those moments, late at night, huddled under their blankets, his imagination had played cruel games with him, making him imagine that he'd heard noises. Noises of animals, claws on wood, snuffling, growling, like a dog was outside his door, except that such was impossible as he was on the second floor in a gated apartment block. And one moment, he'd even imagined an angry roar out in the city. Maybe he had. Maybe it was the police killing the animal. Doubtful. There hadn't been any gunshots. It was probably just his imagination playing back the same harrowing sound the animal had made when it dropped that man's arm. This was PTSD or something, a recurring dream. It made sense, given how panicked he was. All in all, one bad night's sleep was a small price to pay. His eyes trailed down the wall into the drain below, where the water swirled at the bottom of the shower, round and round in a clockwise motion, ever downward, down, under. His head beneath the water, staring into a dark tunnel, being pushed forward, suffocating. His leg gave as he fell, snapping out of the daydream with a startled yelp. He managed to snap out a hand in time to stop him before he banged his knee on the shower floor, but only just. Another nightmare. This time while awake. The feeling of being pushed down into water. Had it been because of Cardin's bullying the day before? Oh, great. Now I'm getting PTSD over that? No. He rubbed his face and sighed. It was probably just his nerves fraying or the adrenaline coming and going. He'd jump at just about anything right now, Cardin included. His cheek twitched. He could hear it again. If it wasn't the nightmares keeping him up, it was the infernal dripping. like a tap left on over a full sink. Except that he checked all of his at least 10 times now and couldn't get it to go away. It must have been from next door, either the empty apartment or Blake's, which meant he wasn't going to be telling her to turn it off anytime soon. She'd notice it whenever she next used her tap. He just had to put up with it for now. Maybe school would help in that regard. The officer did say to go back to his normal routines. With that in mind, Jean slung his bag up over his shoulder and let himself out, slamming the door shut behind him. As he did, he noticed some odd grooves on his door. Were those claw marks? No, he was imagining it, or making it worse than it had to be. A cat, a dog, or maybe just a raccoon or something. Monsters weren't real. Least of all the kind he thought he saw last night. Jean closed his eyes and his mind and hurried to the staircase, hopping down them two at a time. He had a life to live, and that life didn't include wild fantasies and nightmares. Pushing himself into the classroom, Jean checked his watch. 20 to 9, which meant he had 10 minutes left until everyone was expected to sit down for names being taken. He breathed a sigh of relief and looked about the room, bringing up a hand in a wave when he spotted Ren and Nora by the back window, sat at their desks. Nora had her bag on the space to her right, saving it for him. "Hey, Ren," he said, sitting down. "Hey, Nora. And thanks." Nora giggled and took her bag back. "No problem." It wasn't accurate to say he had no friends in Eastfield, just very few. Ren and Nora were his only ones, and it was a miracle he'd made them in the first place. Ren was a quiet and introspective guy with dark hair, Asian features, and a perpetually calm look on his face. He was the kind of guy who could have been cool if he wanted to be, but who didn't care enough to try. He wasn't lazy, just focused on what he thought was important, schoolwork and a small number of friends. Nora, on the other hand, was his exact opposite. Bubbly where he was taciturn, talkative where he was quiet, and all around hyper. She had pretty green eyes, vibrant ginger hair, and a pale complexion. She was a girl who by all rights shouldn't be sat with him, let alone talking to him, but instead be a part of some popular clique. She had the kind of figure most guys drooled over, and combined with her wide smile, friendly personality, and generous proportions, she was the epitome of the girl next door. He'd have harbored feelings for her too, if it wasn't for the fact he knew she was so obviously into Ren, his best bud. That put a damper on such things, but luckily did so before Jean could develop his own feelings and get hurt as a result. Since he'd known he realistically wouldn't have had a chance from the start, he'd never fallen for her, and instead savored their friendship. Meeting them had been a fluke, though. He'd come into class on his first day, filled with crushed hopes and dreams after realizing Cardin had come to haunt him. Lost and lethargic, he'd sat near the quietest guy he could find, hoping beyond all hope that the guy would at least put up with him. Ren had said nothing, but then he hadn't had to. Nora appeared a second later to tell him that was her seat. He'd been so embarrassed, he'd gotten up to leave, but Nora wouldn't have it, dragging him back down and saying that she understood. Ren was awesome, and that they could share him. One sitting on either side. She then dragged a table over, very loudly, and sat Jean down behind it, forming a trio that just sort of held after that. Ren went along with it because it was easy, and Jean did because, well, he hadn't known how to say no to Nora. It all worked out, though. "You look terrible, Jean," Ren said, concern across his face. "Were you doing homework all night?" The veiled question wasn't very veiled. They knew about the bullying, knew and wanted to help, but Jean wouldn't let them. Like most schools in the U.S., Eastfield operated a no-tolerance policy for bullying, among other things, and as such, if they tried to help him and were caught in any violence, they'd be suspended, or worse, expelled. That, and he doubted it would change anything in the long run. Their understanding was enough, and their help cleaning or catching up on ruined homework. He didn't want to lose them. Of course, Cardin had also had to play by the no-tolerance rules, but the one time he'd done something overt enough to be seen, his parents had called in some favors and reduced his suspension to detentions instead. Since then, he kept his bullying secret, and often non-violent. Or, well, non-violent in the sense of leaving very little evidence that could act as proof. Either way, Ren was way off in this case. "It's not what you think. Well, He hesitated, but the police hadn't told him to keep quiet. Eventually, he caved and leaned forward, motioning for them to do the same. Okay, listen. I got involved in something last night that I really shouldn't have. I'll tell you about it, but you have to stay quiet until I'm done, okay? Sensing how serious he was, they both nodded, and John dove into the tale of the previous night, sparing no grisly detail as he went. Ren's eyes widened and Nora's mouth fell open, but, true to their promises, they remained silent, listening as Jean described the fear of being trapped so close to death, the panic afterwards and the nightmares that kept him awake, and his meeting with the police. Once he was done, he yawned and said, "And that's why I look like death warmed over." "Shit," Nora whispered. "I heard the news about a wild animal this morning," Ren said, equally shocked. "I didn't think for a second you might have been involved. No wonder you feel so bad. I'm glad you're safe." "The police said it was normal to feel like this, given what I saw." "I can imagine. Are you sure you should be in school today? Surely the teachers would understand." "They also said I should have as close to a normal routine as possible. Being at home," Jean winced. "It didn't help. Being left with my thoughts isn't a nice thing right now." "Do you want us to come over tonight?" Nora asked. "We could make a sleepover of it." Jean smiled as he felt a rush of warmth inside, for a moment dispelling that annoying dripping sound that still clung to him. That was just like Nora, instantly dropping all her plans to help a friend. Ren was there too, nodding. "Nah, it's fine. How about this weekend, though? Want to go downtown together, the three of us?" "Sure!" Nora exclaimed. "Fine with me," Ren said. "Thanks," Jean nodded. "As for today, well, I'll just try not to fall asleep or freak out at any shadows." "Ah, well, we'll just have to keep an eye on you just in case." "We sure will," Nora said, gripping his hand in hers. "Don't worry, Jean. You'll never have to deal with anything like that again. My dad's a cop. He'll find the crazy thing and catch it. Then we'll put it in a zoo and people will pay to come see it." "Yeah, I'll pay not to," he said, though he managed to get out a little laugh. "I'm just looking forward to the weekend. I need to have a proper lay-in." The door opened once more as the homeroom teacher came in, the signal for everyone to take their seats as he made his way to the front of the classroom and settled down. Jean took his bag and stuffed it under the desk, pausing as Nora bumped a knee against his beneath the table. A silent show of support. He smiled back and immediately felt a little better. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. School progressed as it usually did, and Jean was surprised to find that the familiar routine did, in fact, help. He was too distracted by the droning of teachers and the subjects he didn't care for, and the subject matter in the courses he did like, that he hardly had any time to think on what happened the night before. At least, mostly. The breaks between lessons were when his mind went back to that moment, and Ren and Nora couldn't keep him distracted all day long. It's normal, he told himself. There was nothing wrong in being plagued by this. A part of him wanted to call his father, who had dealt with numerous people suffering stress and even PTSD, usually for a lot worse reasons than he. Nicholas would understand what was going on and drop everything he could to come help, but something stayed Jean's hand. Maybe it was the desire to not be a burden, or just that typical male instinct to do everything without help, bottle it up inside and deal with it in-house. Either way, Jean found himself backtracking each time he thought to tell his parents. Best not to worry them, especially over something they couldn't help. His thoughts strayed to the girl, too. Hard not to. She was the easier thing to think of compared to that monster, even if she had promised to deal with him. The memories were hazy, and he'd been too panicked to pay attention to the details, but she'd looked young. Younger than him, though maybe only by a couple years. I refused to believe I hallucinated all that. What was that? Ren asked, stood nearby packing his own bag as the lesson ended. Huh? Oh, nothing. Sorry. Talking to myself. It was clear Ren didn't believe him, but his friends made a point of not pushing. Either he or Nora had been by his side all day, even when he went to the bathroom. The hovering was so much that even Cardin had given up any hope of getting a chance alone with him, settling for a body check into the lockers earlier. He'd only managed that because Jean saw something. A huge shadow had appeared on the edge of his vision, filling a corridor from floor to ceiling in a vaguely animal-like shape. He'd almost screamed before it vanished, leaving nothing behind. It had been hazy and indistinct, and he realized after, likely a hallucination based on what he'd seen yesterday. Still normal, he thought to comfort himself. There was nothing wrong about jumping at shadows after seeing someone killed. It would be weirder if he was fine with it all. Don't worry about it, Jean said to Ren. I'm just jumpy. Can you blame me? Ren laughed. I guess not. Take my advice, Jean, even if you dislike it. Stay home tonight. Don't go out on another late-night jog. Huh, yeah, as if you have to tell me that. Even when he picked running back up, he wouldn't be going anywhere near the park. For now, and the foreseeable weekend, he intended to lock himself away with pizza and kebabs. We're meeting up Sunday, right? He said, changing the subject. At the bus stop, then to the movies? At 11, yes. Don't eat. We'll get lunch before the movie. Are your parents okay with it? Ren's parents were immigrants, like Jean's own. His had come from France and Ireland, whereas Ren's came from across Asia. It was hard to tell with Ren looking like a cross between Japanese and Korean, but the bigger difference was how conservative Ren's parents could be. They didn't have a problem with him, but they weren't sure what to make of Nora and her interest in their son. It didn't help that Nora was so outgoing and friendly to anyone and everyone. As far as they know, I'm going to a movie with you, Ren said. Make sure it stays that way, all right? Huh, yeah, sure. I'll be your wingman. Ren sighed. You know, it's not like that. Won't stop me teasing. Idiot. Ren smirked and punched John's arm lightly. When are you going to find a girl so I can do it back? I'm not really what most girls look for in a guy. Oh, yeah, sure. Blonde, athletic, and independent. Such unattractive traits. It's a wonder I can stand in your presence without being sick. The sarcasm was thick. I can understand not being confident, but that's not going to change if you don't approach someone. Think on it, before Nora gets it in her head to matchmake for you. You don't want that. It would make things a bit easier. You don't want that, Ren repeated, slower this time. Have faith in the man who knows her best. All right, all right. You two really are peas in a pod, though. When are you going to ask her out and go official? It's not that easy. Things are complicated. Ren said no more, and Jean caught the hint to leave it be. With school coming to a close, many of the students were already filing, or outright running, for freedom. Ren was always more sedate about it, both as per his personality and because he had to wait for Nora, who had her own classes since she was studying business. Nora and business. It had surprised him, too. Either way, Jean waited along with him, not yet wanting to be alone. While Ren packed up, Jean allowed his attention to wander out the window to the front of the school below, where a horde of students were pouring out the front entrance like water from a hose. Most congregated in groups like their own, chatting and making plans for the weekend. Bike racks were also busy, along with the parking area, small as it was, and overflowing with parents to come pick up their kids as usual. Eastfield High was reputable enough that some traveled to attend. A shock of blonde hair caught his attention, long and lustrous with a golden sheen. Most people nowadays considered their hair long if it went past their shoulders, but she wore it down to her lower back like a waterfall, wild and often untamed. Setting your sights a little high there, Ren commented. Jean's cheeks flushed. I didn't say anything, he glowered. And didn't you just tell me that I'm not unattractive? Say it like that and Nora will start to worry. Besides, there's still such a thing as aiming too high. Though, what do I know? She's turned everyone who's ever asked her down. Maybe you have a shot. Yeah, I doubt it. Yang Xiaolong. Chinese name, Caucasian features. It was hardly the most polarizing thing about the girl who's considered the beauty of Eastfield High. Her perfect face, vibrant purple-tinted eyes, and generous figure that had caught the eye of every guy with a pulse and an interest in the opposite gender. Some girls, too. Jean hardly blamed them. In a world of Instagram gone wild and racy Facebook snaps, Yang somehow managed to stand above all of it, looking airbrushed in real life. She could have been a supermodel. There were rumors she was. But at the same time, there had never been someone who so encapsulated the ideal of not judging a book by its cover. She might have looked like the preppy girl who wore too much makeup and simpered for the boys, but Yang had quickly set the record straight on that front. There was no one in Eastfield who had more detentions and suspensions than she. No one who had flaunted the rules more obviously, be it scuffling with other students, being late on her homework, or just outright skipping school. Ying may have looked pretty, and was, but she was a delinquent to the core. It was probably surprise at seeing her in school and in uniform that had caught his eye in the first place. What little time she did spend in school, she often spent sleeping, sat at the back of the cafeteria with her eyes closed, surrounded by her posse of popular girls, many of which Jean was sure she didn't even acknowledge. "Not all that glitters is gold," Jean said whimsically. "You should try that line on her, see how far it gets you." "Yeah, shut up, Ren." Great. And now that Ren has some ammunition, the teasing was going to be paid back tenfold. I'm just surprised she's here. Most of the teachers have given up on getting her to do anything. It's a miracle she's not dropped out by now. "She must be passing then," Ren said, "if barely." "Maybe she could use a tutor." "Shut up, Ren." His friend grinned impishly. "Just saying." "Yeah, well, I'm just saying you can—" Jean cut off as down below, Yang turned to the side, reacting to something. The surly scowl she wore almost all the time, along the pinched eyes that spoke of exhaustion or lack of sleep, faded away in an instant. A smile came out, bright and warm enough to light even the darkest room. He didn't think he'd ever seen her smile. Not really. Sheesh, it was as beautiful as the rest of her. Jean grumbled at that and the quick pitter-patter on his chest. Out of his league by miles, she may have been, but he was still a teenager. He was allowed to admire from a distance. Curiosity got the better of him, however. What could make someone like her, Little Miss Gives No Shits herself, smile like that? A boyfriend, a lover? Jean half expected someone covered in tattoos on a motorcycle to pull up. What he didn't expect was a little girl flinging herself at her. Yang caught and spun her around, laughing delightedly. "Huh? Ren looked over, and, like the whipped, not quite boyfriend he was, showed no reaction to Yang's beautiful smile or laughter. "Oh, I heard she'd had a sister." "A sister?" "Little sister. Think she studies at a nearby school. Some guy in calculus tried to befriend her to get close to Yang. Didn't go well from what I heard." He could imagine. It had happened once or twice with guys trying to get him to like them to improve the odds with his sisters, always to similarly disastrous effects. Still, the two down below didn't look like one another at all. Yang was tall and full-figured, while her sister was short and, from what he could make out under her hoodie, thin and not nearly so developed. She had darker hair, too, the bangs poking out from her red hood. Red. Ugh. That infernal sound again. Jean gripped his head with both hands, as if trying to plug the leak. Had someone left a tap on in class? He backed up a bit and hit the table behind him, wincing as it scraped across the floor. "Jean," Ren asked. The sound receded a moment later, and Jean let out a long breath as he opened his eyes. The world was the same, albeit for some spots before his eyes from how hard he'd held them. Unbidden, his attention went downward again, instantly meeting a pair of eyes looking directly up into his. "Oops." Jean flinched, caught. They were both staring directly at him as he stared down on them from the second-floor window like some kind of stalker. Yang looked unimpressed. Her sister, well, hard to say. Surprised, if anything. What to do? Smile and wave, look away. Not much point pretending he hadn't been watching if they'd caught him like that. Jean swallowed and made to tear his eyes away when something caught them. Yang's sister. She had pale skin and dark hair tipped with red, along with bright silver eyes, visible even from how far away he was. They were wide, and growing wider as if she'd recognized him. Remembered him. The girl from the park. It was her. Jean took a step back as panic set in. He hit the table again, but this time pushed it back. There was no mistaking the girl down below. Her face, what little he'd seen of it, was burned into his memory. As if to prove the point, she said something quickly to her sister and broke off, taking a step towards the school building, eyes locked on his even from so great a distance. She rushed forward and out of view, into the school. I'll deal with you in a moment. Shit, shit, shit. Jean grabbed his bag and darted, ignoring Ren's worried shout. I'll see you Sunday, Jean yelled, slamming out of the door before his friend could ask what was wrong. There was no doubt in his mind that the girl, the killer, was coming for him. She had no reason to be here, let alone go into a school she didn't attend. His eyes flicked to the stairs leading down and out, but they were the central ones, the very staircase someone entering the school would use. He went the other way, dashing through the empty halls with his heart hammering in his chest. There was an alternate route down and out, over by the main hall. He reached it and pushed through, looking around quickly. Yang wasn't here, nor was her sister. Taking the steps two at a time, Jean hurried down and pushed out of the fire exit nearby, closing it behind him. His heart was hammering in his chest. Still, he was out of the school, around the back, and she was inside. Not willing to push his luck, Jean ran off the school grounds and into the streets of Vale. As he turned two corners without incident, he allowed himself to relax just a little, slowing to a fast-paced walk. Something was going on here. If the girl was real and not a hallucination, then did that mean the other things he'd seen were real? What if that monster had really existed? What if there was more of them? The sound echoed painfully, forcing him to grip his head again. It was gone a second later, but the sound of the water breaking the surface felt like a knife through his skull. He swayed and had to hold a hand against a nearby wall to steady himself as his head throbbed. Ugh, why? Gritting his teeth, his eyes opened. The world seemed shadowed. No, that wasn't quite right. It was more like the shadows were wrong somehow. The one connected to his feet was fine, as were those around him of other people, but it was as if some also walked upright of their own accord. A few times when he was younger, and even more recently, he thought he'd seen a shadow walk by from the corner of his eye, only to find it not there when he looked. Such stories were common, just attributed to the mind creating an image for some minor movement caught in peripheral vision. Nothing serious, but now, here, they remained. Stayed. Didn't fade into nothing but an overactive imagination. They were still just shadows, however. One passed right through him without any feeling, without even reacting to him. Jean's eyes were drawn up towards the sky. His mouth went dry. There was a black line across the sky. A jagged black scar, as if someone had taken a black marker and drawn a lightning bolt directly into the sky itself. It pulsed along with the dripping in his head, almost in tune with it. And judging from the way everyone continued about their day, he was the only one seeing it. What's happening to me? He was gone. Again. The girl slammed a hand on the empty windowsill she'd seen him at. The classroom was empty, and she didn't really belong, and would be told to leave if anyone saw her. She hadn't passed him on the stairs, which meant he must have found a different way out. He knew the area better than she did. She'd messed up again. Damn it! The sound. She knew it well, and had done since she was young. The girl's silver eyes were drawn up from her clenched fists out of the window and towards the sky, where a jagged black line had appeared in the sky above Vale. It had not been there that morning. The girl cursed and took a nervous step back. Yang appeared from the corridor, her expression stony. Looks like it's going to be a busy weekend. The girl didn't disagree. Couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the jagged, pulsating scar. A nightmare is coming. Thank you for visiting the archive, travelers. Like and subscribe for more, and if you have any story suggestions, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and I'll check our shelves. Thank you again for visiting, and safe travels on your journey.